So this is animal part 2. And basically, you might, okay, so it looks kind of weird, but it has a purpose. So on the exam, you're going to need to know what things can do what, right? And there's going to be a lot of different plants and animals, and you want to make sure you can differentiate what can a sporophyte from a moss do, right? Can it do aerobic respiration? Can it do anaerobic? Can it do photosynthesis, right? And you don't want the exam to be the first time you think about things like that, right? So this should help you think about those things. And I want you to write this down somewhere. So A, citric acid cycle. A, citric acid cycle. B, non-cyclic flow. C, Krebs cycle. D, CAM photosynthesis. E, C3 photosynthesis. F, PS1. G, lactic acid fermentation. H, Kalman cycle. I, P680. J, photosystems. And K, glycolysis. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to wait until everyone copies that down. Yeah, that was intentional. Okay, are y'all ready? I need to write faster. Are you ready? Almost. Okay, so are you ready now? Okay, and I'll read them out again. Okay. So let's start with, so the premise of the idea is Aunt Molly went out, had too many drinks, and so now she has, I'm just going to identify some of the things on here, so it's easier. She put a cactus on her head, she's wearing a snake, and that's a glass of wine. She's carrying a giraffe, and here's a tree, here's some grass, here's a pig smelling a flower. There is water droplets falling out of the glass, falling onto a moss, gametophyte with a moss sporangium growing out of it. So, I'm just identifying all the things in the picture. So let's start with Aunt Molly. Aunt Molly is a human, right? So real quick, can she do photosynthesis? No. Can she do, what kind of respiration does she do? Aerobic respiration, right? So does Aunt Molly do the citric acid cycle? Yes, right? Does she do non-cyclic flow? No, she doesn't do photosynthesis. Does she do the Krebs cycle? Yes, that's the same thing as citric acid cycle. Does she do CAM? No, she's not a plant. Does she do C3? No. Does she have PS1? No. Does she do lactic acid fermentation? Yeah, she can do it, right? This is a condition, right? Depending on if she's running or not. Does she do the Kalman cycle? No, right? She doesn't do photosynthesis, so she does not do the Kalman cycle. Does she have P680? No. Does she have photosystems? No. Does she do glycolysis? Yes. Right, so that's Aunt Molly. What about the cactus on her head? Does that cactus do photosynthesis? Yes. Is it multicellular? Yes, it's pretty big, right? So it's multicellular, so what type of respiration? Aerobic or anaerobic? Aerobic, okay? So does the cactus do citric acid cycle? Yes. Does it do non-cyclic flow? Yes, right? Does photosynthesis? Does it do the Krebs cycle? Yes. Does it do CAM photosynthesis? Yes. Does it do C3 photosynthesis? No. Does it have PS1? Yes. Does it do lactic acid fermentation? No. Does it do the Calvin cycle? Yes. Does it have P680? Yes. Just real quick, P680, it was from what photosystem? 1 or 2? 2, right? Okay. Does it have photosystems? Yes. Does it do glycolysis? Yes. Okay. So what about that snake on her neck? The snake on her neck should be the same as Aunt Molly, right? So same as Aunt Molly. So it wouldn't. Okay, so it wouldn't do the lactic acid fermentation. So except for G. G is lactic acid fermentation. I'm not sure if snakes do it or not. I don't think so. All of that, I'm not sure. Actually, I'm not sure about snakes. I know humans do it for a lot of animals. I think it's an animal, so let's. Okay. I don't know that much about snakes, honestly, so I'm not sure. But I'll look it up and post it on Facebook. So the giraffe would be the same as Aunt Molly. And so is the pig, same as Aunt Molly. Okay. Let's look at the piece of grass. So this is a regular piece of grass, like the ones you find in Lubbock, right? So does it do citric acid cycle? Yes. Does it do non-cyclic flow? Yes. Does it do the Krebs cycle? Yes. Does it do CAM photosynthesis? No. Does it do C3 photosynthesis? Yes. Does it have PS1? Yes. Does it do lactic acid fermentation? No. Does it do the Calvin cycle? Yes. Does it have P680? Yes. Does it have photosystems? Yes. Does it do glycolysis? Yes. Okay. Let's look at the yeast inside of our glass of wine. So, okay. So yeast, do they do photosynthesis? No. Do they do respiration? They do anaerobic, right? So does yeast do the citric acid cycle? No, right? They do fermentation. Do they have non-cyclic flow? No. Do they do the Krebs cycle? No. Do they do CAM? No. Do they do C3? No. Do they have PS1? No. Do they have lactic acid fermentation? No. Do they do Calvin cycle? No. Do they have P680? No. Do they have photosystems? No. Do they do glycolysis? Yes. Okay, so we're almost done. What about this? So water is falling onto, this is actually a moss gametophyte. What color is a moss gametophyte? It's green. Okay, so because it's green, can it do photosynthesis? Yes. Is the moss gametophyte multicellular? Yes. Okay. So with that in mind, it does photosynthesis and aerobic respiration. Does it do citric acid cycle? Yes. Does it do non-cyclic flow? Yes. Does it do Krebs cycle? Yes. Does it do CAM photosynthesis? No. Does it do C3 photosynthesis? Yes. Does it do PS1? Yes. Does it do lactic acid fermentation? No. Does it do the Calvin cycle? Yes. Does it have P680? Yes. Does it do photosystems? Yes. And does it have glycolysis? Yes. What about the moss sporangium? This one's a bit tricky. What color is the moss sporangium? Brown. Does it do photosynthesis? No. Is it multicellular? Yes, so does it do aerobic or anaerobic respiration? Aerobic. So does it do citric acid cycle? Yes. Does it do non-cyclic flow? No, it doesn't do photosynthesis. Does it do the Krebs cycle? Yes. Does it do CAM photosynthesis? No. Does it do C3 photosynthesis? No. Does it have PS1? No. Does it do lactic acid fermentation? No. Does it do the Calvin cycle? No. Does it have P680? No. Does it have photosystems? No. Does it do glycolysis? Yes. Okay. Right. So be able on the exam to do stuff like this, right? Right. So be able to match things up from plants and respiration and photosynthesis, right? Okay. Now let's move on.
It was
and with that picture, don't just go around and show people that picture without explaining to them. It actually just makes it look bad. So now let's look at plants. Let's flip to the back of the front cover. The back of the front cover, and you should see this part. The back of the front cover. Can we start?
yes.
Okay, so before we launch into the different categories, I wanted to define a couple terms that will come useful as we move through. And I wanted to keep these separate because I want you to have plans on a single sheet of paper so it's easier to look at the progression. So we're going to start on this page and then move on to a different page. So let's start with alchemy and isogamy. We're doing great on time, actually. We're going to finish by 5:42 at the latest. So let's start with plants. So let's start off with alchemy versus isogamy. Okay. So tell me about alchemy. Two different kinds of gametes. Two different types of gametes. Right? So an example would be egg and sperm combine via fertilization to produce a zygote. Right? How is isogamy different? Yeah, one type of gamete. So you have isogamete plus isogamete undergoes syngamy, S-Y-N-G-A-M-Y, to produce a zygote. Is there genetic variation in coogamy? Yes. Is there genetic variation in isogamy? Yes. Right, so the only major difference is this: you have one type of gamete and it fuses via syngamy instead of fertilization. Any questions? Which is the more primitive one? Isogamy. Right, this is primitive. Okay. Let's define this next term is super important, and it's gametophyte versus sporophyte. Gametophyte what does the term gametophyte mean? That just means it's the haploid stage. So gametophyte means haploid stage, right? So it's like saying, it's not a structure per se, it's just telling you what period of time, right? It's in its gametophyte stage. Anytime you see gametophyte, you have N. It's always haploid, right? Anytime you see sporophyte, that means you are in the diploid stage. Diploid stage is 2N. So your sporophyte is always 2N, okay? And later on, you have haploid dominant versus diploid dominant, right? Haploid dominant is the more primitive. Right? If you think about it, the haploid version, the gametophyte is smaller, right? So to be supported, to have your sporophyte be supported by the gametophyte, that can't be good, right? So being haploid dominant is the primitive version. And before we start, can anyone tell me one of the groups that is haploid dominant? Mosses, right? Mosses are haploid dominant. Okay? And then from ferns on, ferns, gymnosperms, and angiosperms, everything else is diploid dominant, right? And that's the more advanced stage. What's the benefit of being diploid versus haploid? Being diploid gives you 2 copies of every gene, right? So you can mask a lethal recessive gene, right? Being diploid dominant allows you to mask a recessive lethal gene, right? Okay, so this is really important. Don't forget, gametophyte is haploid, sporophyte is diploid. Okay. And another distinction is the difference between heterospore and as we move through the plants, be able to identify when the first time something appeared. Right? What was the first group of plants that were diploid dominant? Ferns, right? When was the first time you didn't have swimming sperm? The gymnosperm. Right? So we're going to go through those, but keep those in mind, the first time something happens, right? Okay. So with heterospore, what is that? 2 different types of spores. Forms 2 different types of gametophytes. Right, so an example would be the microspore mother cell produces a microspore which produces a microgametophyte. Is the microspore mother cell haploid or diploid? It's diploid. Microspore is haploid, and so is the gametophyte. So going from the microspore mother cell to the microspore, is that meiosis or is that mitosis? That's meiosis. Going from the microspore to the microgametophyte, is that mitosis or meiosis? Mitosis. Right? And you have a second type of spore, which is the megaspore mother cell, which is diploid. That produces the megaspore, which is haploid, which produces the microgametophyte, which is haploid. So again, this is meiosis, and this is mitosis. Where do you start seeing heterospore? What's the first group of plants that has heterospore? Gymnosperms. The gymnosperms, and then of course the angiosperms also have it. Why is it more advanced than the other category? This eliminates the need for swimming sperm, right? No more swimming sperms. what about this group? Homospore. You have one type of spore produces your gametophytes. Right, so an example would just be your spore, haploid or diploid. Spore is haploid, produces your gametophyte, which is haploid. So this is mitosis. Okay. So what are examples of this? So the mosses do this, right? And so do the ferns. Right? You just have a spore produce a gametophyte. Right? You don't have a microspore mother cell and a megaspore mother cell. And the gametophyte will produce archegonia and antheridia. The archegonia produces the egg. The antheridia produces the sperm. Okay, any questions? Okay, and one more thing before we move on to the rest of the plants. The spores are haploid. The sporophyte is different. But the microspore mother cell is different on the left side. Okay. So one more thing, so real quick, I want to make sure you know the life cycle of a plant. And it's actually not that complicated, but it can get complicated, right? So you can put this somewhere wherever you want. But so if you start, I'm just going to start with spore. I didn't have a space for this, but if you want to just put it under here, I don't know if you have it. If you want to put it under here so you have it, let's just start with spore. So this is just a really general life cycle. Okay? So spore is haploid or diploid? Haploid. The spore develops into the gametophyte. Haploid or diploid? Haploid. So this is mitosis. The gametophyte develops into, it produces what? It produces gametes, right? And you can produce archegonia and antheridia. Right? The archegonia is the egg. Antheridia produces the sperm. The egg and sperm will undergo fertilization to produce a zygote, right? The zygote is 2N, right? So the zygote develops into what? Yes, so it develops into the sporophyte. Haploid or diploid? Diploid. So this is mitosis. The sporophyte produces spores via the process of meiosis. Right, so be able to go backwards and forwards, right? And the really important ones is, if you can remember, spore goes to gametophyte, goes to zygote, goes to sporophyte. You can figure these out, right? Real easy, right? So if I just cover this up and just do it again, if I started with, this is just practice. So if I started with sporophyte, 2N or N, 2N, it has to go to what? Spore, which is N. Spore has to go to gametophyte, which is N. And then eventually you're going to form the zygote, which is 2N, and the zygote develops into the spore. Right? So it's the same thing, just it gets more complicated, right? And the time you have meiosis is over here, right? From sporophyte to spore, right? So if you can remember this basic framework, you can kind of figure out all of the life cycle, right? Okay. So now I want you to flip to, I think it's very last page.